Africa demands its true place on the map. For centuries, the world has looked at Africa through a distorted lens, literally. The 16th century Mercator map shrank the world's second largest continent, making Europe and North America look oversized while Africa appeared smaller, weaker, marginal. Now, in a historic move, the African Union, AU, has endorsed the Correct the Map campaign, demanding that schools, institutions, and even the United Nations adopt the Equal Earth projection, which shows Africa's true scale. The AU argues this is more than geography. It's about power, identity, and justice. Did you know Africa is big enough to fit the US, China, India, and much of Europe inside its borders and still have room left? Yet children across the globe grow up seeing Africa minimized. The World Bank has already begun phasing out the Mercator projection. Now the AU wants the world to follow. This isn't just a map change, it's decolonization in action, says AU officials, warning that visuals shape global perceptions of Africa's influence, resources, and future. With over 1.4 billion people, vast resources, and growing economies, Africa refuses to be drawn small again. This fight is about reclaiming space, dignity, and truth on the map and in the world. That's it for today, because knowledge is power.
This is how the world would look if our maps were actually accurate. It's Cool Map Monday, where we look at an interesting map that I found on the internet, and here is a brilliant visualization from Neil Kay. So the world map that we normally see is based on the Mercator projection from the 1500s, which was designed to help people navigate seas. It wasn't designed to accurately represent landmass. But if it had been, it would look more like this, and as you can see, some countries in the traditional map we're used to seeing are represented as far bigger than they truly are.
Let me show you the visual, the map that blows my students' minds every year. It's like every year I know that there are a few timelines or maps or whatever that I know are gonna hit. Like I know kids are gonna have a whole moment and their like view of the world is gonna be reoriented. This is always the number one. So let's see how big Africa really is. Just take this all in. The continent of Africa could fit the continental United States, China, most of Eastern Europe, India, most of the Western European countries, and still have room to spare. This, by the way, is why the concept of African history is as equally like hard and expansive as the concept of something like Asian history, right? You have to get more focused in. What do you mean? Do you mean West Africa, North Africa, that's really part of kind of the Islamic world, the Eastern coast and the Indian Ocean, Sub-Saharan, Central, they're all different and unique.
The African Union is calling for the world map to be changed because it apparently doesn't show the true size of Africa. The African Union, a group of 55 countries, is requesting that the world map be changed because it apparently shows Africa as much smaller than it actually is. The African Union published this map saying that the United States, China, and all these countries fit in Africa. In this image shown by the African Union, it shows that the United States could fit approximately 3 times as large. And if we compare this on the Mercator map, the United States would be approximately twice the size of Africa. This group of African countries even mentions that they are comparing Greenland to Africa when Africa is much larger. According to this, Greenland measures approximately 2.5 million square kilometers, and Africa has an area of 30.37 million square meters. The difference is huge, and on the map, they show it almost the same size. The African Union is requesting that the Mercator map, the one you see on the screen, be replaced by the Equal Earth map, the one you see here, which apparently shows Africa's true proportions in the world. This is the difference between these two maps, the Mercator map and the Equal Earth map. The African Union says this is a historical error and is asking for this map to be corrected so that it shows Africa's true size.
This is the Equal Earth projection, and it might be the fairest world map ever made. Why should you care? Because most of the maps we grew up with didn't look like this. We'll get more into that later. The Equal Earth projection was created in 2018 and was designed to show the world's land masses at their true size, while still looking balanced and familiar. Okay, well, what's so wrong with the old maps? Take the Mercator projection. It was built in the 1500s for sailors, and it works great for navigation, but it distorts the world. On Mercator, Greenland looks like the same size as Africa, but Africa is in fact more than 14 times larger. The Gall-Peters map tried to fix that, but its shapes look kind of stretched out and unnatural. Equal Earth projection solves both problems. It preserves true area like Gall-Peters, but with shapes that look closer to a globe. That's why the African Union is now calling for Equal Earth to replace distorted maps worldwide.
Your map is actually lying to you. This is actually what it looks like, but they're not going to show you that, and there's a reason. It's because they don't want you to know this. This is one of the most common maps to see in the world. This is the one that a lot of people are taught in school, and it's called the Mercator Projection Map. And they'll tell you that the reason that we use this and teach this in schools is because it's hard to put a three-dimensional globe onto a two-dimensional piece of paper, to which I agree, but that's not the whole story. Because this map is not accurate at all. This is a nautical map. Very often these maps are actually marked in nautical miles, and that's the whole reason these were even invented. And this map actually works really well for sailing, because it allows people to know what's north, south, east, and west. And it was much easier for them to stay on plot as long as they were following the lines of the map. But what's really terrible about these maps is the further away you get from the equator, it distorts the sizes of the countries. So on the Mercator projection map, we see how big the US is versus South America. Russia is gigantic. And then we see that Africa is not that big compared to like North America. But the dark blue is the actual sizes of the countries. Look how massive this landmass of Africa is compared to all of North America. Look how big South America and Africa are in comparison to everything. Look how tiny Russia actually is. And of course, when I'm saying tiny, I mean relative to the size that they've been portraying it as. Now let's look at what countries benefit from this. Canada looks much bigger than they actually are. The United States, Greenland, Europe, Russia, China. Again, everything that goes further away from the equator gets inflated. What's really interesting though is if you compare this size difference, a lot of countries that are considered superpowers are all the countries that are benefiting from this inflated size on the map. This makes total sense because in order to control people, you have to let the masses think that they're outnumbered. So not only does it help these superpower countries give the perception that they are bigger than they actually are, it also makes people think these things aren't as big of a deal as they are. And when you look at all of these continents and countries that are not benefiting from the size inflation, you see that these are often a lot of the places that are being exploited, such as Africa. They don't want you to think about how Africa is actually a bunch of different countries, and that it's a massive landmass with a lot of people and they hold a lot of power collectively. And the people exploiting continents like Africa, they don't want us to know that all of our countries could fit inside of it. And realistically, Africa should be one of the world's superpowers, but all of their resources are exploited by different countries. Part of them being able to do this is by tricking people into thinking that there is more of the oppressors than the oppressed. And some people are going to say, oh, they haven't been oppressed. Absolutely they have. Look at all the European countries as well as America. And for centuries, just going in and hurting people and taking whatever they want. But for all of these little leech countries to go and feed off of a continent like this, you have to convince them that they're smaller. It's like a bully trying to puff up his chest. Now, a lot of people are going to try to just shrug this off and be like, it's just a map. It's not that deep. No, it is that deep. They erase people and culture and manipulate the masses with maps. And you have these horrible monsters who are trying to erase people and places. Now, instead of this map, if they wanted to show you a more accurate version that still has the same concept, they could show you a Gall-Peters map, which has the distortion so that countries are more to their accurate size, but I still think they look a little inflated even on this one. It is really complicated when you're trying to put a globe onto a flat surface, so a lot of times there is going to be some kind of distortion. But we already have a solution to all these things, and it's called the Orthograph. And it's a relatively new map. It was made in 1999. And this map is much more accurate. Now, it's not going to be great for sailing, but one thing it also does is it shows the poles. Whereas on the Mercator map, like I talked about, when you move away from the equator, the size distortion gets larger, so you see that Antarctica on the map looks gigantic, when in reality it should look more like this. But there's another reason why they probably don't want you to use this map. So when they do eye tracking tests, they find that most people look right about here when they first look at a page. And then from there, they typically do a swirl around. And now this isn't always exactly the same, right? And this is why design comes into it, because you can pull somebody's gaze to a different part of the screen immediately. But by default, they will look right about here where you see the biggest concentration. And I know some people are going to be thinking, well, there's a woman sitting here, that's why. But this is when they were looking at her. This is a blank spot. There's no reason for the person to look at that so intensely, but they did because that's where you'd start. And that lines up with a Mercator map. Exactly where you would look is at the United States first. But if you swapped over to an autograph, well, now you don't look at it first. You'd have to look over to the right to find it. And I think this is one of the big reasons why the Mercator projection map is so heavily pushed in America and other Western countries. Because of the size inflation and the psychological effect that that has. And the fact with eye tracking it benefits North America. And there's been some schools in the US who have been purposefully swapping away from the Mercator projection map They're swapping over to the Gall-Peters maps because they're similar to a Mercator projection map in look and style, but they have more accurate sizing for countries and continents. Because seeing this size difference, it really does have an effect on people's psychology, and they know that. It reminds me a lot of A Bug's Life. Because when people try to control other people, one of the things that they have to do is convince them that they're more powerful so the other person doesn't want to fight back or thinks that they can't. It actually reminds me a lot of a movie. I can't remember, how did that one end?